G'day, welcome to another live session. And in this session, I'm continuing talking about line quality, about the marks we make on the paper and whether we feel that they are or they aren't helpful in producing the drawings that we want. And so, what I'd really love is to have your questions on the issue. What are the struggles you have when you look at your drawings, when you look at your line work? In some ways, there's two parts of a drawing. There's what we see in our mind that inspires us to want to draw, the kind of the creative output that we hope to have, the dream, if you like, of how our drawing's going to look, the thoughts, the ideas. And then there's how it looks at the end, and what's the gap between what we thought and what we've produced. Now, there's always going to be a gap. Let's not be unkind on ourselves. There will always be a gap because we will always able to have more imagination than we're able to bring into being. So that's okay to a degree. And in a sense, that gap between what I've produced and what I was thinking of before I started, that gap between the two is in a sense what leads me on in the next drawing as well. It's the thing that gives me something to aim at. So let me see. So for instance, I think, well, I like lots of things about this drawing, but gosh, it doesn't really feel like it goes back in distance as much as I had hoped or planned. Well, that's now something I can focus on in the next question, the next drawing. But I suppose the issue for this session is, well, what is it about my line work that's not working? What effect hasn't my line work created? Or what are the problems when I glance at my drawing? What are the problems, and in what way are they connected with line work? Is it where I put my lines, or is it the way I make my lines, or is it a combination of both? I'd love to have, with the 8 people who are watching right now, I'd love to have at least one question from you so I can stop rabbiting on just with these general thoughts and answer some quite specific things. Now, if you're watching this in as a recording after this live session, I'm afraid I won't be able to kind of answer the questions in the comments in the way I can here. So yeah, this is a topic that we had in the last live session, but I'm very aware that living in Australia, we seem to be in two extreme time zones for people. And we're either a time zone that half the world can make, but the other half is asleep, or vice versa. So I thought, well, if I do a live session my night and my morning, then that really gives different people in different parts of the world a chance to join in the session. So it's it feels like early morning for me. It's only 8 a.m., but it's a chilly winter's morning. So yeah. But I woke up, jumped out of bed, and sorry I didn't give you more warning. I just wasn't sure what time I'd wake up because it was a late night last night. So enough of that. Question, please. 11 people are watching. Are you right now? So do you all have no problems? Thanks, Sarah. Yep. Asking people to hit the like button. Is that how it works, Sarah? That if more people hit the like button early, then YouTube will tell more people about the live session happening? Well, that's a tremendous reason to hit the like button. So thanks, Sarah, for that. Appreciate that. Hi there, me too. You've just woken up too. Well, not far behind me. Try and get my voice working. I have just had a cup of coffee. Yeah. So question about drawing, about line work would be great. What's your frustration about line work? What is it that's obvious about your line work, or is there something that's not so obvious, or is line work not the real issue that you have, the real problem that you have? What drew me to work directly with ink? Okay, some questions coming in now. Well, interestingly, if I'm honest, the main reason I began to draw directly with ink was because felt I was becoming more and more constrained in my pencil drawing because I did draw with pencil for very intensely for a year or maybe a year and a half before I began drawing with ink. And I hated the fact that my perfectionistic tendencies meant that I was focusing more and more, feeling more and more that every line had to be correct before I could go on in the drawing. And so I felt like I was spending more time erasing than I was actually drawing. And this is why I talk about perfectionism on and off, and I have a few videos just on it. So if perfectionism is now perfectionism is not having a high standard. It's where you never think something is quite good enough, and you better fix it before you can go on, because you can't go on with it looking like that. So it's nothing to do with having high quality. It's something that's which is a good thing. It's something that ends up being quite destructive because it makes the whole drawing experience very tense and unenjoyable, which doesn't help, and it invariably leads to frustration. Again, because we're never going to be able to do marks that are perfect, and so um, and I feel this was an unhelpful thing. Um, and the more I was erasing, redrawing with pencil, then I was starting to get a lot more smudgy issues, and I switched to a mechanical pencil, and that helped a bit. But um, I was also therefore seeing some line work, and I saw some videos of people drawing freehand in ink, and I thought that would be so wonderful. And we had this trip planned for 2020 to Europe for 3.5 months, which finished up sadly being cancelled with COVID. But um, I wanted to sit and do some nice bold black and white line drawing just in the street of the buildings around me. And so I thought I want to develop that skill because I don't know, the pencil was messing with my mind too much and was therefore less enjoyable. Look, let me say, pencil is a wonderful medium, and there's wonderful things you can do with it. So I've got absolutely nothing against graphite. It's been an important part of my drawing development. And just recently, I did a few pencil drawings on location. I did some videos on those maybe 6 weeks ago. And when I sat down to draw the tree in pencil the first time for years, it was such a wonderful experience. So graphite's wonderful, but for me, it wasn't working in that I was becoming too obsessed with making everything correct. And I thought, well, one way around this, one way to tackle this head on, is to draw directly in pen when I can't erase anything. So firstly, I have to be a little more cautious in putting my marks on the paper. But then secondly, what's there becomes part of the end drawing, but it also becomes part of my process. And I found that firstly, I didn't make as many wrong lines as I thought I would. And the ones I didn't like, almost all the time I could correct in some way. I could overcome the problem with how I'd put the mark in the first place. That I could bundle it with other things by the end of the drawing that meant it wasn't so obvious. And that was a huge revelation, a huge place of understanding in my experience. It's one thing for someone to say, oh, this can happen, but it's another thing in your drawing experience to actually have it happen, to realize that, you know what, most of the time you can work this out. I don't know if I'm just trying to find it. The drawing I did the other day, which I used in another video yesterday, and therefore I think it's just on top here in this pile of stuff that I've got just on top. No. Yes, here it is. If you saw the video on this small Australian parrot, a ground feeding galah, you'll see that I actually made so many mistakes at the start, and I really thought I'd ruined it. And it's only that it was going to be quite a quick drawing. I thought, look, I'll just keep going. And I didn't say this, but in my mind, I'm thinking I'll just keep going. But I actually say when I do a line that I really don't like, I try and actually point that out in the drawing, because part of what I'd like to teach is that we can overcome these things. And if you don't realize that I'm not happy with a mark or a line or how it's not looking right for me right at that point, then you can't appreciate at the end how it looks. But I don't think you're probably going to see anything particularly wrong with this drawing. But part of me wanted to stop drawing it and start again 3 times. And for me, it's another encouragement that, hey, with our line work, it's the total package at the end, and we fixate too much. We fixate too much just on one part. I've gone beyond that question, but that's I really, 2 reasons. One was going overseas, or hoping to, thinking we were, and then wanting to um, be able to draw directly in ink and be able to splash watercolor over the top without thinking that the pencil was going to smudge. So I had actually planned to start to learn watercolor, and that was. But honestly, there's been so much depth for me, I felt, in just drawing with ink, that I have not got to the watercolor yet, except to have all the watercolors. I have a nice just down at my feet here. I have a nice little watercolor set all ready to use. But honestly, I really am still finding so much expressive ability in the line work that on any given day, I think, no, I'll do another line drawing. But the other reason was to overcome that perfectionism that had built up in my thinking, and that was just making the drawing experience not so enjoyable. And I was even putting off sitting down to draw because of the tension that a line might be wrong and I have to fix it. And as I said, the way to overcome that was to make erasing not a possibility, so that there was, only one way forward, which was forward. Keep going, keep drawing. Yeah, and please, if you could hit the like button for me, that would be great early on in the session, because as Sarah kindly pointed out, it would encourage YouTube to notify more people that this session is on. Do I ever use fountain pens, Jesse? No, look, I don't. I don't. I've certainly seen and enjoy lots of work that's drawn in fountain pens, and I should give it a go, because the various nibs obviously give you a lot of ability to change the line. I mean, a blunt, a square cut nib means you can turn the pen, and you can change the line from thicker to thinner and so forth. A lot more than I guess you can get with just a fine point nib. So I probably should. I suppose I just think of fountain pens, those fountain pens, as for writing, because, well, when I was a lad, we learnt to write in ink with fountain pens. We actually weren't allowed to use biros till we hit high school, till we were 12, 13, that age at school. In primary school, we learnt running writing, cursive writing, with fountain pens. So I just think of them as being a writing tool, which of course is way kind of crazy. Yeah, it just hasn't been my experience. So I can't recommend any brands, except that a few of the people whose work I really enjoy use. Now, I don't actually even know if this is a brand or if it's a type of nib, but they're called Fugue, I think, or Fuge, or Fuge, or Fuge nibs, pens. I don't know, but they seem to produce some really expressive artworks, really expressive drawings using those nibs. So maybe you'd like to look that up if ink drawing is something you do. If I do start with fountain pen, that's certainly a brand I think I'll explore, just from the works I've seen with it. Hi JR, it's midnight. Chill on YouTube. Thank you. How to overcome the fear? Look, fear is one of those things. If you can work out where it's coming from, sometimes that's helpful. If you can work out what exactly am I afraid of and why am I afraid of it. So, I would say the fairly standard fear with drawing is that it's going to look rubbish, and I will feel bad about myself for some reason, in some way. And I don't want to feel bad about myself, so I'm not going to take the risk that I'll disappoint myself and so somehow prove that the things I'm afraid are true about myself really are true, that I have no talent, that I can't do it, that other people are better than me, and blah, 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 blah. Because, and of course, all of those things have nothing to do with what's real or true. It's just something we're afraid of for some reason. Perhaps perhaps we weren't encouraged to see anything about ourselves. There was no one encouraging us when we were young. These things come from lots of places, um, but the fact that despite the fears, I want to draw tells me there's something in me to come out through drawing, because I don't have to draw. You don't have to draw. None of us have to draw. And so when we want to draw, when we think about drawing, when we dream about drawing, when we see drawings that other people have done, and something in us goes, I feel like there's something of that in me. I'm almost afraid to say it out loud because it seems so presumptuous. That shows there is something, at least to explore. And I suppose we have to be able to reach the place in our head where we're prepared to accept what happens. I think the other important thing to realize with the fear, and I think now I'm thinking on my feet now, but now that I think about it, this is probably a huge part of the answer also, is that we have a wrong idea of what the drawing experience is. And we think that being able to draw well, has to do with having this talent, has to do with being born with an artistic talent, and so we're able to do it. And that's not true at all. Drawing is a skill. It's like learning the piano. It's like learning to kick a football. It's like swimming. It's like learning to use an Excel spreadsheet. There's a fun hobby. Um, but there's skills that we learn, that we put together, and that we practice, and that we improve on, and that we build a basis of knowledge as we progress. And I think because we don't realize that with drawing, for some reason, I think it's this whole unhelpful talk about, oh, you're so talented, as if, oh, that means it just kind of oozes out of you and you don't have to work at it. If you like my drawings, thank you. That's great. I've got to the place where I like my drawings now. But I've spent thousands of hours drawing over the last 2 years. Now, I'm very fortunate. I'm at a stage of life where I can do that, and I couldn't have done that for most of my life with other responsibilities, and that's okay. But if we think that being able to draw is this expression of this thing that I'm born with, and my drawings, and I feel like I have it in me, and then my drawings don't turn out, then I feel like, oh, I've made a mistake. Gosh, I'm not really artistic. I'm not really talented. I'm not really creative. And now the experience has become something that we feel, condemns us in some way. It actually makes us feel less good about ourselves, and we don't want that. And so we just don't draw. But if we realize that drawing is a skill to be learned, then that's okay. I can be easy on myself. When I sit down to learn the piano, I do not expect to play a piece with no mistakes. I wouldn't expect to play a piece at all. And yet somehow I can sit down to do my first drawing and feel that because I feel like I'm talented, or people have told me I am, it has to look great. And if it doesn't, that means I've got no talent, no skill. So yeah, they're the things that that I think. But if I understand the process, perhaps, then I won't be so scared, because I learned French. I expect I'll say some of the words wrong. So why is drawing any different? Why can't I give myself room to learn? Because I understand it's a learning thing. Now, we can learn better ways than others, and you might have heard me say I was once a high school teacher, and it wasn't art; it was English and history. But in teacher training back in the 70s, we learned how to learn, and I found that incredibly helpful, as I have now sought to explore learning and drawing, and I've been able to apply those principles in my own process, I think, to to maximize the time I put into drawing. I hope that's helpful. Let me just have a look at okay. What exercises do I recommend to improve line work? Um, I recommend drawing. I'm actually not big on line work exercises per se, um, because how we want a line to look really depends on the context. It depends on what we're drawing, and even in the overall drawing, how that thing looks is going to change. What I need to do is in my mind to be flexible about the marks I make, and this is where now look. I mean, if I draw subjects where I need long straight lines, if I draw grand palaces and things that need long straight lines, then I can practice long straight lines. But that's really getting the confidence and the mechanical ability to keep everything smooth and moving to get whatever length line I want. But I don't think just kind of, I don't know, doodling around or whatever is particularly helpful. Even things such as hatching, I can't really see the point of lots of hatching in little sample boxes, because hatching looks different on every surface we put it on, because the way we hatch depends both on the form that's being hatched, and it also depends on the overall effect that I'm trying to create with that part of the drawing in the overall drawing. And we only learn that by doing it. But what I would suggest is that we make it, what we can do, and I think this is a very helpful thing, is I can do a line drawing and just do just like outline, no hatching at all. Take a photo of it, print off 5 copies of it, the same size as the original drawing that you did, and then play around with different hatching. You're not worried about ruining the line drawing now. And what you're able to do is explore the way different lines create effects in hatching, because hatching is just a form of line work. And you can focus on just the hatching. So if you only have a 15-minute block that to learn drawing in, to extend your drawing skills, spend all of that 15 minutes, if hatching is lines in hatching is a weak spot, spend all of that 15 minutes from the first to the last minute just working on hatching. And you can be really bold because you're not afraid of ruining the artwork, of spoiling the line drawing, of making the line drawing time, maybe that took an hour, that becomes a waste of time now because you spoiled it with the hatching. No, that's just the starting point now for your exercise. And again, the problem is we're preoccupied with producing artworks instead of trying to work out the best way to learn to draw. We never stop learning. My drawing style and abilities are continuing to evolve, and I encourage to think grow with my practice, because as I draw things, I can see new possibilities all the time. There are more subtleties that I can get, or there are some topics which I always felt were too hard for me to do, which increasingly I'm able to do better with practice. But I didn't start with the things that are more difficult for me. I started with the things that, for various reasons, were easier, more straightforward for me to do. But if we focus, and they're good, they're always good things to start with. And usually the things that are easiest for us to draw and to practice and experiment with are things that we really like, because we've seen them a lot, we've observed them a lot, and it's easier to observe them now because, firstly, I like them so much, and secondly, they're very familiar things. And for me, architecture was, oops, just sorry, I just pulled the power board off the table, because for me, architecture is that thing, and therefore I sort of have a head start in drawing it. I don't mean a head start against other people. I mean a head start for myself, that if I say, wanted to draw, um, how do I say something and not get people upset? Um, let's say horses, because I mean, my sister loves horses. She's had horses, but um, but for me, they've not been a part of my life or thinking in the same way as architecture. And so I haven't got a lifetime, I haven't got decades of observing horses and having a good feel for how they move and the form and the shadow and the light. But with architecture, I did. So therefore, I was starting further along in the drawing process with observation for architecture. Um, 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 yeah. So I think coming back to the question, Sarah, I think the best exercise is to draw rather than just to do little conceptual kind of practices. Unless straight lines are good, and yeah, learning to do a nice at least quarter circle line, I think is helpful. But really, going beyond that, how our line looks, how our mark looks, is going to be more to do with the actual drawing. And I think when we don't like our line quality, it's because we haven't matched the line or the mark with the purpose of that line in that drawing, in that object, in that part of the drawing. It's not that I haven't been able to draw a line, it's that it's not the most appropriate line for the effect I want. It's not the most effective line for how I want all these lines to combine and how they look in that combination. And I can't practice that just doing lines in boxes or doing big lines, on a page. I mean, to me, that all feels quite pointless unless that's what I want to do, unless I just have fun, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Um, I spent most of high school just doodling, you know, little things in margins and things, and making all my books look really messy. Um, but in terms of improving my line making for drawing, then that happens in drawings, and it happens when I do things and then I look at them and I say, how is this not working the way I wanted it to? Or maybe it has worked the way I wanted it to, but now I realize that what I was thinking was insufficient, that there was further I could have been expecting my drawing to come. And what would I need to change if I were doing it again to take it that further distance? I see I've created a certain effect, but I could have created it more. So what's demanded of my marks to create the more? You know, what can I see that's worked a little bit, that if I'd been more conscious of it, I could have tweaked it more when I made the marks? Because these are all the things that I take into my next drawing. We should always critique our work. We should always look at it, particularly when we're not happy with it. And that's the problem. When we're not happy with the result that our drawing has produced with the way the lines look, often we just want to get it out of our sight and have it not say, what were you thinking? What a waste of time this was. When in fact, as a learning process, what I should do is mark my work. When I did my maths every day, when I was in school, I certainly haven't done it since. When I did my maths homework every day, I had to mark it. And marking it told me whether I could move ahead or whether I should go back and keep working on that particular thing, that particular topic. It was almost always I needed to go back and keep working on that particular topic. But it was the marking that told me whether to go on or stay and keep going. Yeah, I don't know. But with drawing, it's exactly the same thing. I have to mark my work, and I mark it by saying, has it achieved the overall effect that I'm after? It's not saying everything has to be perfect, but um, have I got to the place with it that I wanted? And if I haven't, what are the parts that aren't aren't working? Is it simply an inaccuracy in a form? It's meant to be squarish and mine's long and pointy or something. Or is it that the lines look stiff and wooden and they need to have more movement? more life. Or I see movement and life and animation in other people's lines, maybe their lives, but in their lines. And my stuff looks very kind of heavy and ponderous and overly solid, and that creates not the effect that I want. Working that out and putting it into words, at least for ourselves, is so important in then saying, okay, so how do I get rid of stiff wooden lines? How do I draw lines that have more life? And then working out the process for that. Because if I'm self-taught, I have to be my own teacher. And in this YouTube age, we have so many more possibilities of things that we can have access to that can help us. But we also miss the things that come from face to face and from being in a classroom. So there are tremendous possibilities with YouTube, but there are also shortcomings. And one of the shortcomings is that the YouTube, I am not your teacher. You are your teacher. And you're choosing as the teacher to use this video or some of my videos or my channel as a resource for your curriculum. But you're overall in control. You're overall choosing what video input to have, what YouTube input to have. And so, you need to do the job. I need to do the job as a self-taught artist with my teaching. But having been a trained teacher, it's easier for me to do that because I focused on teaching. I'm just going to turn the heater on under my legs. There we go. Starting to get chilly. I'm on the cold side of the house in this room. Anyway, let's look at another question. Evening, Ian. G'day, DB in AZ. I presume that's Arizona. Nice budgie. It's not a budgie, Ian. It's a galah. You should know that, you galah. Draw with a mechanical pencil. Yeah, look, I finished up drawing with a mechanical pencil, and I found that really suited my line drawing because I wasn't doing all the kind of fuzzy shading stuff that you can do with graphite. I was using the pencil to get line work, which probably made the transition to pen a bit easier because it was more parallel. Love more flower videos. Yes, well, it's the middle of winter here, so there aren't many flowers around. I actually, for the video, I'm just flicking through some in the video I did yesterday, I used this as a quick example of something in the video, a daisy flower, and it made me think, be nice to do more flowers too. I do love flowers, and I do love gardening. So, although I'm more growing vegetables now than flowers, but it just occurred to me you can draw vegetables too. Maybe I should draw my snow peas, or at least when I've got some crop to draw as well. But thanks for that. Best subjects for beginners, like for daily practice. Well, think about. Let's just focus on the fact that when we're a beginner, and this period can extend for years, when we're a beginner, we're learning to draw. So think about if I were learning the piano, which I've never done, but I've watched my children do it. When I learn the piano, when I learn any new skill, what happens? How do you start? Where do you start? What do you start doing? Well, you start at the beginning. And if you're finding these helpful, please hit the like button for me. You start at the beginning. So start at the beginning. Start with simple subjects that you can draw well. Now, I don't mean necessarily just draw a cup or just draw a vase. I don't mean simple as in one. If you want to be drawing scenes, then start with drawing scenes, but start with simple scenes. Don't run to complexity, which is what we all do because we get excited with the possibilities we have in our mind and we want to start at the end. And if, one of the things I'm really glad I did was I showed the self-restraint when I was in Paris not to try and draw the front of the Musée du Louvre, of the Pavilion Richelieu, because it would only have ruined it for me because I wasn't ready to do that. And at some point, I learnt the skills that I needed to be able to do it the way I wanted to do it, and I was able to draw it freehand. But unfortunately, when I was actually in Paris, I wasn't at that place because I hadn't learnt the skills. So we develop skills over time. So start with feud. Yes, Sarah, it was feud, F-U-D-E, not fuse. Thank you. So start with something simple that I like, and if I draw it well, then I can move on to something that's more complex. And again, you think of learning the piano, you have to play very simple pieces with just a few notes. And when you can play those well, you move on to, I know there are other ways of learning the piano and the Suzuki method with the violin where yeah. But I think you need a particularly good teacher for that. But generally, we learn foundational skills and then we build on them as we master them, and we as we become confident with things and don't need to be so intense about concentrating on those, then that space is freed up for a further new thing, and we can work on that. And basically, should we? When can we move on? We can move on when we're doing it quite well, when we're maybe covering 90%, 80%, say, well. But if there's more than 80% that's still got issues, then I need to use that to show me where to focus, or maybe to tell me you've just reached too high. This has just been too hard for where you're at. So pull back a bit, because there are too many elements that you're obviously not able to do well at this point. So this is where we need to be the teacher, and we need to make some hard calls, and sometimes we need to reevaluate our timelines. And again, for some reason, we think that drawing is different to learning Spanish or, learning other skills that people learn, that we sort of expect to be a learning process. So, love more flower videos. Water bottle. I like drawing flowers quite hard since making mistakes with them are more noticeable. Yeah. It depends. Sometimes flowers can be forgiving if there's a big shrubby bush or something, but if it's a solo flower, there are more elements than you would think. And like one of the big ones is the way the petals join onto the bit that sits on top, that sort of often little fluffy round bit that sits on top. And the petals go in a certain way that differs from flower to flower and join the stem in a different way. And the way the petals behave at the outer edge depends on what shape the petals are and how therefore gravity affects them or doesn't, but also how thick they are. All of these things. Some petals are really fine and some petals are really thick and fleshy, and we want to capture all of those things when we draw the flowers. Some flowers are very delicate and look as though they blow away in a wind. So these are all it's not just drawing. It's not just as if let's say we get a photo of a flower and put it up on a window, and we put a bit of paper on top, and we get our pen and we trace around all of the outside lines. Well, that's going to be an accurate copy of one aspect of the flower, its shapes. But it's not really going to create the effect of the flower. It's going to be a very heavy two-dimensional version of the flower. And I think the problem is that we often think that an accurate outline is a successful drawing, when an accurate outline can be a really wooden, stiff, somewhat tedious representation of the subject. And what we want to do with our marks, with our lines, is find a great nuance in expressiveness possible from them by varying them in so many ways. And I mean, I use the word lines because people do, but I actually never use the word line anymore in my thinking and my drawing myself. I only think of marks. I only think of mark making because it's so much more than lines. And I often don't use lines now. I just use little dots or dashes in my drawing to indicate for me where something is happening. And I don't want a big, heavy line because that doesn't represent the effect of what we're seeing in life. So maybe a really obvious example for me is if we're drawing a building and it's really easy to think, oh, well, the building is a box shape. And so we draw lines to represent the box. Now, those lines down the sides of the building and even across the top may work for representing what we're seeing. But that line across the bottom, visually in life, is not the same. I don't see the same thing when I see where the building touches the ground that I see the side, say, which may be silhouetted against the sky. Where the line touches the ground, there's often like little bits of grass growing, there's little bits of, I don't know, gravel or stuff that's rolled up, that's been blown up or kicked up or swept up against the building. And all of these little things, they break the visual line that we might have seen if it was perfectly clean. Or possibly it's dirt and it's the ground layer with little bits of grass all the way along. Well, if I draw a line quickly across the bottom because, oh yeah, well, that's a straight line, then I now can't create the effect. I've lost the opportunity to create the effect of where the building touches the ground, and that it is a sort of a bit of a ruffled effect. And even if I'm some distance away and so I can't see that in detail, that means I don't need to draw it in detail. I can draw the effect of the detail. But again, if I do a straight line, I'm not drawing the effect of the detail. I'm simplifying what's there and creating a more artificial look than what's really there. And so my drawing looks not quite real in that part. And if I take that shortcut in lots and lots of places in my drawing, then my drawing won't look real. Even if, and I'm assuming we want an element of realism in our drawing, even if all my outlines are accurate. And when we think that drawing is somehow copying the outlines of the objects accurately, then we end up with a very outline-focused simplification of the subject. And what does that line up with? Well, that lines up with the cartoons we watched as kids, because that's what they are. They are heavily outlined, silhouette almost outlines and simplifications of whatever they're meant to represent in life. And that's why my drawings look cartoon-like, because I've used the same drawing sort of conceptualization that drawing was for me as a kid, which is that when you draw something, you draw the lines around it as accurately as you can, and then you put the details in. And that's how you draw cartoons. And that's how I did all my early drawings, as we all do. But it's not a process that can be improved upon unless you want to draw better cartoons. We need to switch our thinking, I believe, to get away from the thought of I'm trying to accurately draw an outline of something to therefore capture what it looks like, to create what it looks like, to get the shapes right. And instead I need to say, when I look at something in life, it creates a certain visual effect. There are some parts I see clearly, some parts that seem fuzzy, some parts that are the focal point right at that moment because that's what I'm looking at. And then there's peripheral things that I don't see as well as clearly. The light level creates certain effects depending the light contrast creates certain effects. And some parts, some surfaces, some silhouette edges of an object on one side of the object can look heavy and dark, and on the other side they can almost disappear into space. And do I use the same line on both sides? If I do, I'm going to be pulling back from reducing the realism, the sense of realism. What I need to do, I believe, for an effective drawing is to find marks, and lines might be part of that thinking or might not be. I need to find lines that create on one side a heavier solid effect, because that's how it looks, but on the other side a light insubstantial effect, because that's how it looks. And this is all to do with seeing the effect, understanding the effect in life, and then working out what marks will capture that effect, which means that we don't so much draw objects that then are there on our page. As we draw, we start to create a lot of visual effects that at the end our subject kind of pops into life. I don't know, this is the way I think. And I think that and I'm actually preparing a video on this at the moment. I'm coming up to my 1,000th video on YouTube, and I think this is going to be the topic of it. Does that make sense? We have to get rid of, I think part of the reason we often have poor looking marks is our conceptualization, our thinking, our understanding of what drawing is, and therefore what we're trying to do is faulty. And unfortunately, it owes too much to the drawing we did as children, which is often very influenced by cartoons and by what other children were doing, rather than as an adult, how can I capture visually the effect of what I'm seeing? And so, I find that it is in these sorts of subjects where particularly an emphasis on line drawing is so unhelpful, because how do you draw shapes when you've got that level of complexity? No, what you're trying to do is create the effect of the complexity and give space for the viewer's imagination to see the detail that you haven't drawn. And what's really important in a scene like this is to get a sense of closer and further away as well, and to have enough detail that we can actually work out what's happening. There are individual leaves that I've drawn there, kind of in the center left sort of side, which are closer. But then there's a lot of marks that still represent foliage, but it's actually just very fine hatching. And yet I've given enough clues in the detail I have drawn that's closer for our brain then to be able to say, and this is more trees further back that I just almost see as a plane of value. But I know what that is because there are marks that tell me what that is. How do we draw water? Well, we can't sort of draw falling water, because so much of the effect is the falling and the bubbling and the foaming. So it's how do I capture that effect? And I don't capture it by long, heavy black lines, unless I'm wanting a fairly cartoon, two-dimensional, simplified depiction of a fountain. Then I can. Everything always depends on the effect I want to create. And that's why there is no simple, do these 5 line drawing exercises before you start to draw. I actually, yesterday's video is on how to warm up for a drawing. And it came because I'd seen some videos on basically doing lines in boxes as a warm-up, and I think that's quite pointless, if I'm honest. Some of those things can be helpful just to develop straight lines, or to develop the skill of doing a lot of parallel lines very close together, which can be helpful for hatching. But that's not a warm-up for a drawing. That's sort of a skill development. And again, that's something I can focus on, just as that one thing, without a drawing, in the way which we learn the piano. In the same way, if we're learning the piano, we can do scales to develop our skill with our fingers on the keyboards without actually having to play a tune. In fact, it can be more efficient to just concentrate on the scales, which is why I guess teachers have kids do it that way. Um, but um, but warm up is something that we do when we're actually drawing. So, what's the best way to warm up? Well, I explained that in the video I did yesterday, and can I say it's one of the most important things I learnt to do. And there's a couple of things that have absolutely transformed my drawing over the last 2 years. um, and I do believe that the reason, in my mind, my drawings have been able to develop in their style so much, way past the point I ever thought they would, is because I'm making all these videos, and it's forced me to put into words what probably would have just stayed as vague thoughts swirling around. And the more I had to put it in the words to speak it to camera, the more deeply I came to understand the process, at least my process. And the more I understood it, the more I was able to consciously work with it to my advantage. I was able to really embrace the things that were having a positive impact, and I was able to stay away from the things that I could see weren't so helpful. And a lot of it, so much of it, well, all of it really came from changing the way I thought about the drawing process. And when I freed myself from the idea that drawing was all about outlining shapes accurately, and shifted to drawing is all about creating on my paper certain visual effects that I see in life, it revolutionized what I was trying to do, and therefore what I was working towards doing, and therefore what I ended up doing, and steadily, I think, began to do better and better. Does that make sense? If you're finding this helpful, I've just given you my drawing secret. So please hit the like button for me if you haven't. If you like my drawings, it's it's that thinking that's let me do things, that's let me draw things. And even that thinking is also even in something such as this, where I'm creating certain effects, because light is an effect. And even though I'm using a different medium here, because I'm using ink, which gives me possibilities that are different to hatching, conceptually it all comes down to the same thing. What's the effect in the reference that I see that I'm trying to do, and how can I capture that using the medium I'm drawing with? Um, what ways of putting this medium on the paper will create that? And yeah, it goes way beyond drawing an outline. And if my aim is to have an accurate outline, if my aim is to have perspective angles that are correct, and that's the only thing I'm aiming at, then my lines, my marks are probably not going to be as creatively different from each other as they need to be for the overall drawing. I mean, correct perspective is one of those things that we shouldn't notice in a drawing, because when I walk around the streets looking at things in life, I don't think, oh wow, that perspective's correct. Oh, look at that building across the road, its perspective is correct. No, when the perspective is correct, you just see it as being correct. You don't think about it because it's what you expect. And that's what we want in our drawings, for the perspective to be so correct that we just don't think about it. What happens is, when we don't get it correct, it's either obviously wrong, or we may not understand why something doesn't look quite right, but we can tell something's not quite right. That usually means the perspective's not quite right. Okay. Hi there, Eri. What's JR saying? You're so right. That's exactly the way I feel with myself and my art. I put so much pressure on myself all the time. It's hard, especially about depression. Yeah, and if we have sort of anxiety or depression, that's probably an indication that our default place is to be a bit heavy on ourselves, and to be a bit easy, a bit quick to judge. And as I said, I think if we understand that art is not this release of natural talent, and we have to wonder whether we have enough talent or not, but it's a skill to be learned, then we can start the process of learning. And like, I think sometimes we think some people are more skillful than others, because some people seem to start further ahead. But I would say what that means is they're not starting further ahead because they've been born with a head start, but their life experience up to that point has simply equipped them with some of the skills that we use in drawing more than for someone else. They've learnt to observe more carefully for a different reason than than someone else. And this is why if we draw the things that we love, it's easier to draw them because we've looked at them for longer, more intensely in terms of our life. And so we have a head start in observation and understanding of form. But then when we go to draw something that we haven't looked at in that way, so say if I go to draw a horse, it's not that I don't know what horses look like. I've ridden horses, I've seen them and blah, blah, blah. But I've never studied them with the same intensity. I've studied a Greco-Roman temple or something. And so I don't have the kind of the head start in understanding the form and the form in different circumstances that someone who's grown up loving horses will have, because they will have observed horses so much more intensely. But it's not that one of us is a better drawer than the other. It's just that if we're both drawing horses, that person is in a head start position with observation because of other things not connected with drawing compared to me. Or it could be I'm in the head start position for a different subject compared to them, say architecture. I've got used to how perspective looks just from looking at more architecture. And so it's easier for me to get perspective looking right because it's easier for me to see when it's wrong. And that's what nudges me. When I can see a line's not in the right place, that's what nudges me to get it in the right place in the next drawing. Water bottle, practiced that one yesterday. Yes. Good point, water bottle, saying that in his head it's the symbol of the flower that is stronger than the actual flower that he's looking at. I'm just looking down trying to find a pen. And of course, we all know this is what a flower looks like. And the trouble with this sort of thing is that we actually don't get the nuance of how the flower, how the petals attach, where they attach. There's an Australian flower called the flannel flower, and this is a cross section, and the petals attach. They come down in this real like L shape, not L shape. In this sort of shape, and kind of come in underneath. But the petal sits higher, but then at the center it creates this little three-dimensional effect thing happening here, which when you see from and when you look at it from above at an angle, it's a very distinctive kind of effect then that it creates visually with the flower, and careful observations needed. But if we're thinking, this is what a flower is, we don't look hard enough to see that. And we end up thinking that this is what we're drawing as a see-through, as a cut-through, instead of this. And so, we really do start with observation. We can't draw what we haven't seen generally, unless we've seen it previously, and so we can kind of anticipate it. Do I review sketches people make with the help? Look, I do charge for that. I do, but if you're interested in me critiquing your work, I do like a 1 hour critique as a one-off. I mean, I have drawing students as well, but I am happy to do a 1 hour critique. So if you like the details on that, but that is the one thing I do charge for. I do need to eat and pay the bills. But it can be, very helpful. What I do is I get people to email me, say 3 drawings as along with the actual drawing reference, the photo usually that they use to draw it from. And then I basically pull it apart. but I try to show areas where I think there are perhaps the biggest weaknesses, and point out productive ways that could move through that, depending, of course, what's, stylistically how people want the drawing to look at the end. But there's, I do get a bit overwhelmed at times with people contacting me for lots of things, so it can be hard to stay on top of things as well. But so you can contact me on Instagram through a direct message, through a DM if you want more details on that, or email my website, and everything has the same name, Stephen Travers Art. Ian, look, that's a good point. I mean, I have Ian saying he leans into the cartoon aspect in his work because it's a style he's deliberately pursued. And that's why I do try and say over and over again that it does connect with what our aims are, where we're wanting to end up with, how it's going to look. And there are all sorts of stylistic things we can bring into our drawing, and simplification is one of those, not necessarily in a cartoon direction, but to bring that cartoon element as a means of simplification, or as a means of saying something, as a means of focusing attention on certain aspects, elements of our scene, is great. And in the end, it's what works for the end result that we're visualizing. That's always the aim of our learning and our skill development, is for what I have in my imagination that I'd like to see created on the paper, on the canvas, whatever, in the end, what will bring that about? How do I put the ink on the paper? Lines, marks, splashes, swirls, stippling, hatching. How do I put the ink on the paper and combine all of those elements to create what I want, create what's in my imagination? Maybe on a good day, go beyond what was in my imagination. It's always great when we see things that are working and we're able to push it further in the actual drawing process. It's not a good strategy for making realistic drawings. We don't have to make realistic drawings, of course, only if we want to. I mean, I guess I'm a bit of an old-fashioned guy, so I do like to. But it just depends, what we're trying to do or say or create in our artworks. Tarzan illustrations. Thanks, Ian. I used to read Tarzan when I was a nipper. Do I use tape for that drawing for the edges? Yes, I certainly do. Yes. When I do these sorts of scenes, I put tape around, and the tape is just low adhesive tape that's I just buy from the hardware store. This isn't expensive art supply stuff. This is a couple of dollars a roll. It's the tape that you it just doesn't have too much stick, so you put it on walls when you paint them and stuff. The only thing to be careful of is particularly the piece of tape across the bottom that your hand rests on. You do tend to can rest on it, and which just presses it down more for the length of the drawing, and so you need to go really slowly taking that off. It's really annoying when you tear the paper, removing the tape. People have said one thing you can do to help avoid that is just to have a hairdryer and just warm the tape slightly, which softens the adhesive even more and makes tearing lesser a risk. We don't manage to have a hairdresser in the house, a hair dryer in the house. So, but I think if I'm going to pursue the watercolor, I'll need to buy one of those anyway. So I did buy one once from a secondhand shop when I was about to start trying watercolor, and the first thing it did was to blow up and create an awful mess. So I might have to go buy a new one. Doodling while listening. That's great. Water bottle. Question: do I have a video on drawing perspective in a landscape? Yeah. Gosh, all these drawings I put to one side for yesterday's video are proving quite helpful. Yeah. Look, here's a landscape, and perspective is not something that is an architectural term. It's used in architecture, but perspective is simply how something looks from a given viewpoint. And when I change my viewpoint, how it looks changes. And the question is, do I draw those changes, and how can I capture the effect of the changes? And if I'm looking down on a person, they look very differently to if I'm looking straight at them. If I'm lying on the ground looking up at them, they look very different. So how the one form looks changes dramatically with viewing point. And we use perspective metaphorically. His perspective on the political situation was, his viewpoint on the political situation was blah, blah, blah. We won't get into that. And that's true for anything. It's just that with buildings, it's kind of more obvious because they're so big and because they're boxy. We can see the changes visually in the boxes, perhaps more easily than a tree, which is a less regular shape. Now, one thing I've never thought about this particularly as a perspective thing, but people do talk about depth perspective. And so creating the effect of distance, of how things look differently as they go back. I suppose I've thought of perspective as angles and foreshortening. But it doesn't matter, in a sense, what words you use. It's all about creating the effect of what we see. And when I look at a scene in life, the things that are closer look different to the things further back. And the problem with a photo is a photo doesn't capture life, the life effects well. It captures more detail than we really perceive in life. And so we can see, more leaves than we would ever see in life because we're not concentrating at that place so intently. But when we go to draw it and we're looking at a reference, we see the leaves and we can make the mistake of trying to draw them in too much detail. And ironically, too much detail can create a less real effect than simplifying the detail. So, but you can see how, I've used various techniques to give a sense that this mountain up here, mountain is just a ridge, is further away than this grass down here. And there's different things, and that there are trees on there that I've represented differently to this tree here because it's so much closer. And these are perspective issues as well. It's always to do with what effect am I trying to create, and this is, if you saw the video I did yesterday, these were my experimenting with marks before I did the drawing, which is a good way of seeing if the way I'm thinking I'm going to create this scene is going to work on the scale I need it to work with the pens I'm thinking of using, whether those marks are going to combine to create, the effect I'm hoping for. Thanks, Ian, saying please give me a thumbs up. I have a hard time, Deb saying, when I'm trying to put an animal in a landscape, the perspective looks off. Well, okay, see, Ian. If the perspective looks off, it probably is off. And so maybe what you need to do is work on drawing the animals not in a landscape. See, there's actually a couple of cows in here, right? See the cows? And they were a lot of problem to put in. And part of the reason they're a problem is that they're so small. And it's easy to think, it's going to be easier to do them when they're tiny because they're just a blob and a few little lines. they're going to be quicker to draw if you know what you're doing. But if you don't know what you're doing, they're going to be very hard to draw, and you can draw them wrong quickly, as well as draw them right quickly. Um, and it's not easy to learn to do something at an extreme scale, either very small or very large. There's a sweet spot for learning to draw something well. And if drawing animals in that sort of context is not working for you, then I suggest that you relatively small scale, but large enough that you can add enough detail to start to understand the form and what's happening better, and just draw the animals. See, this is where we can work on skill development. Skill development is not just drawing straight lines, but particularly when we have repeated elements, we can just practice that element. If we do architecture, the capitals of Corinthian columns are often a weak spot in drawings of neoclassical architecture that I see, because they're complicated and they have their challenges. And how much detail do we draw can be a challenge, can be a sort of frustration. How much detail do we draw? So better to work that out just drawing a row of Corinthian columns than in my drawing when I've got all this other stuff drawn. So when we have repeated elements of our drawings that we know are weak, let's just work on those. And then I can, if the only time you get to practice cows that we're looking down somewhat on is when you do a drawing, then you might get 2 cows worth of practice in 3 hours of drawing. But if you've just practiced drawing cows, you may be able to draw a cow every 10 minutes. So in 3 hours, 6, you can draw 18 cows. So which approach is going to help you improve your cow drawing most quickly? Obviously, just to concentrate on that. And of course, you don't need a 3-hour block. You could just do a couple of cows in 10 or 15, 20 minutes. And then when you do come to actually do a drawing, you're not risking the whole drawing because of a few cows that don't look right, because you've been able to work on just that skill. So I think this is something that makes sense. And again, you see, when we think that drawing is all about producing an artwork, we keep trying to produce artworks when we're not ready to produce artworks. When we think drawing is a skill to learn, then we can start to think in terms of breaking down the skills I need and concentrating on skill development in certain areas. That when I sit down to draw, I'm not going to have a drawing at the end. When I start to learn the piano, I'm not sitting down expecting to play a tune every lesson. I sit down expecting to work on skills that will then be all brought together to create a tune, a melody, whatever happens in music at some point. So yeah. Okay, so I think that's all the questions. Anyone else want to hit me with a question? Now's your chance. Something you've been thinking about with your drawing. If it's not line work, that's okay. If it's a more general drawing question, is there a frustration that you have with your drawing at the moment, your drawing experience? Now's the chance to ask me for free. But I am certainly more and more convinced that the marks we make, the lines we make, the way we think about the whole process, the way we understand what's happening when we draw is so fundamental. And we just don't do enough of that. We just rush to draw. And when we rush to draw, we go back to the same inadequate conceptualization of the process that we've always had, because it has, as I said, it has more to do with our childhood experiences of drawing, of cartoons, and our understanding of what the purpose of the process is and what we're going to get at the end. that it's just not helpful. The piano, yeah, Deb's just saying the piano analogy makes sense. Yeah, what time is it in Arizona right now, Deb? Sorry, you're not Deb, you're DB. But I found the piano analogy very helpful. I've never learnt the piano, and I learnt the violin when I was 12 for 6 months, and then sadly I had to give it up. Um, but I think it's a great analogy because it's for those of us who draw. It's a totally different framework that we're not kind of connected with, and therefore it's easier to see the process. And yet it is a sort of a creative development, and it is something where we 4:16. I hope that's not in the morning. A PM, yes. Good. Thanks, DP. I was hoping this time is better for the Americas, because I am aware that the time I normally do these, which is usually about 8 o'clock at night, my time, I think America, it's about like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in America. So, and because most of the country with that I have the most subscribers in is the US, so it does make sense to try and be a little more friendly for their time zone. Mountain time. Excellent. Yoko, what are you saying? I've never really taken drawing so seriously before, but suddenly I do just draw for no reason at all. I'm new to all these, and how would you give me some advice to get started? Look, I would say, think of the learning the piano analogy. You're learning a skill, and therefore the learning process is what you're going to be following. Don't worry about the thought of talent. See it as a skill to work at. Have a sense of what you'd like to draw, how, because when we draw, we have to draw something, whatever level we're at. So we may as well draw the things that we love, draw the things that we want to be able to draw, and to start to draw them in the way we want to get better at drawing them. So if you want to draw in pen, don't start in pencil. If you want to start with color on day one, but start with color in a simple way, with a simple framework of line or whatever underneath the color, if that's what you want. So start the way you want to finish, but start at a basic level. If we think of learning the piano, we don't, as I was just saying, we don't start playing a tune on day one. We start practicing learning to control our fingers the way we need to produce the notes that we need to produce. And we start with just a few notes, and then we build and build and build on those. And how fast we build depends on how quickly we learn things. And that's different for each of us for all sorts of reasons. So yeah, look, Yoko, one of my things on my list of things to do at the moment is to just create a playlist for maybe sort of 12, 15 of my videos that I think are most suitable for absolute beginners. So if you look out for that, that just might help you navigate my channel in a helpful way. I do have a couple of series. I have a video series from last year, maybe the year before, on easy drawings for beginners. The problem is they got harder and harder as they went on, because I ran out of reference photos that were easy. But yeah, if that's helpful, you could try those. But I think just understand that it is a learning process, and the ways we learn anything mostly can be applied to drawing as well. And the other thing I'd say, Yoko, is the thing that really revolutionized my drawing was when I realized that, for me anyway, for the drawings I was trying to create, drawing was not about outlining objects in my reference, in my photo, accurately on my paper. It was about putting marks on my paper that would create visually a certain effect, and that effect captured reality in some way that for me, for what I was trying to draw, worked. And so I think marks, not lines. I'm not trying to outline a shape. I'm trying to create an effect that involves, lighting and the material something's made of and so forth. We want to be really careful that we disconnect from the cartoon thinking, understanding, and drawing of our childhood. And we've all been there. But unless that is deliberately the kind of the style that we want to kind of immerse ourselves in and create in, we need to shift that thinking, because our drawing comes from how we think. And can I also say that I think about 90% of a drawing's success comes from our brain, comes from our thinking, our creative thought processes, our working out what marks will create the effect that I've just worked out I want to create. We don't want to just draw things accurately. We're not trying to draw the photo. We already have the photo. If I'm not trying to go beyond the photo, what am I doing? Photos have weaknesses. I can draw so that I overcome those weaknesses as well. So all of that, the actual drawing is so much easier to do, almost easy to do, if we know exactly what we're trying to do. The problem is we put our pen on the paper before we know what we're trying to do. And then we wander around on the paper with the ink, kind of thinking out loud as we make marks that we can't get rid of, and wonder why it doesn't look right. It's because we didn't do the 80% first. The problem is the 80, 90, 95% even doesn't take 80, 90, 95% of the time. And therefore we don't appreciate the value, the importance. The drawing still takes more time, but the value of the drawing, I think, is like actually putting the marks on the paper. It's not the technical skill of putting the mark on the paper. The problem is we haven't worked out first what mark we want to put on the paper and where we want to put it and why we're putting it there and how it's going to relate to the other marks. Once we have a clear picture of all that, it's so much more obvious what we're doing with our ink work. Does that make a lot of sense? I hope it does. If it did, please hit the like button right now for me before you forget, before you rush off to get a coffee or catch your train or go to bed. It's 4:49. Oh, sorry. At what time do I usually do your lives? I try to do them at Sunday night at 8 p.m. my time, Sydney time, or 8:30, 8 or 8:30. Yeah, I'm trying. Sometimes I'm just too tired, to be honest. I'm not a young fella, but I'm trying to make that a regular time. But I am aware that's very unfriendly for the Americas, and so that's why I'm trying to do a regular morning. And I'm thinking, if I kind of, in a sense, double up the same topic, do one Sunday night, do one in the morning, maybe Thursday mornings around 8 a.m. Then that makes it easier for me as well. It actually means for the second one, I'm kind of more warmed up in the topic, so maybe the second one's going to be a little bit better. Yoko is saying, oh gosh, yeah, 4:40. Where are you, Yoko? Are you in Japan? I would have thought Japan was closer to Sydney's time zone. So thank you for telling me to draw, and thank you for motivating me. I thought I was too old to get into drawing. I am 16. Too old or too young? Because Yoko, I really have only been drawing for 6 years. So I was 60 really when I started drawing. I painted for 10 years before that. I spent 30 years thinking every day about creating art before that and not doing it. So you are not too old. Gosh, you've got everything ahead of you. All the best. I hope my channel is helpful. But it's how we think, and what you need to do is to detach from the childhood cartoon way of thinking, unless that's what you want to do. And then you start there, but you take it further. If you want to move into anime, well, there is all this, and manga, there is all this emphasis on line and outline, but in an unbelievably more sophisticated way. And it's interesting. It's a drawing area I've got no experience of, except that as a boy, I absolutely loved Astro Boy. I saw Astro Boy basically in Australia when it was being produced in the 60s, and I wanted to be Astro Boy. But that's my experience of that kind of genre. But it's an amazing genre, and honestly, some of the artwork is brilliant. And I'm surprised how often, particularly for these sorts of drawings I do, how often people give me a comment saying, "Oh, that looks just like the backgrounds of this artist," and I check on Google, and it's honestly, I'm so honoured by the comment when I see the work of whichever artist they refer to, because it's brilliant. So I don't know, everything's kind of looping round in some ways. Sorry, I missed it. Oh no, thank you. It's 416. What is my that one little ball? What is my feedback loop for drawing? I'm trying to apply concepts learned from video courses to general artwork. I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. Are you asking me how do I critique my drawings? That's the or are you asking how to link the video to actually what you do? I have quite a number of videos on how to critique your work, where the teacher in me gets let loose. If the question is how do I apply the videos I watch to what I draw, firstly, you need to watch the right videos, because you may be watching videos that actually don't relate to where you're trying to get in your drawing. So, and so therefore, it's only going to both pointlessly use up your time and frustrate you and possibly even confuse you trying to apply things to make something work that those things weren't designed or conceived of to achieve what you're trying to achieve. So, but usually the best way to do that is to watch videos where the creator of the video, the teacher of the video, is producing artworks that's the sort of thing that you want to do, or at least contains certain elements of drawing, whether it's the material or the style that you'd like to do. So I guess that's the first thing. Make sure that it's a good match of video. Not every video is as good as every other video. Not every teacher in high school was as good a teacher as every other teacher. And some classes we enjoyed more and learnt more in, even though it wasn't a subject we particularly liked, because the teacher was so good. I did a higher level of maths to my end of school leaving than I expected to, or than I needed to, simply because the teacher was such a good teacher. I enjoyed being in that class. And so I didn't drop a level that I was probably sensible to do, but I didn't want to be in that teacher's class. So the teacher does make a big difference. And we need to realize that with YouTube videos. And some YouTube videos are as much to do with entertaining as learning. And that's great. We nothing wrong with watching a video that's entertaining me. But our purpose will always determine in the end what we do. And so if I'm making a video to entertain you with my art, then there'll be times where that has to take priority over trying to teach you about art in my video. And so, yeah, it's matching up what we're needing with what's being offered by the creator. The other thing I would say is if what I'm wanting to do, no, I won't say that. I'll say, I think there's very limited value in watching a drawing video where you can't see the reference that the artist is using. And if they're drawing from their imagination, then they should tell you that. Because in the end, the hard part about drawing is knowing what marks to put where on the paper and why to put them. And if I just see these lines appearing from nowhere, well, I've got no idea what the translation process is. I've got no idea what's the artist seeing that's now being represented in this way. Like, how do I create the effect? Like, how do I create the effect of the bushland if I can't see the reference, if I can't see the actual real bushland that these marks then represent? It's just trying to find the photo for this one. Yeah, here it is. It's when I see what the artist is using at the same time as I see the drawing appear, I can start to understand the sorts of choices that the artist is making. I can understand their thinking, and hopefully whatever commentary they're providing more when I can see what's being translated and what's it being translated into. This gives me so much more understanding about process, but I don't get to do that if the drawing just appears. That may look impressive, but it doesn't really teach me anything because I don't get the understanding from it. And when I go to draw a different bush scene, I don't know how to apply what I've just seen. I know it can be done, but I don't know how I can do it myself. So we always need to see the drawing, the photo. The other thing I'd say, again, these are my opinions. You can disagree, and but from my teaching experience as well as my drawing experience, the other thing I'd say is don't ever try and draw along with me. Now, I know people do, and people write in the comments say, oh, I drew along with you and it was lovely. Look, in the end, we all get to do what we want to do in the YouTube world. But from a teaching point of view, can I say, don't try and draw along with me, because when you do, you can't help but in the end just be watching my drawing and copying that, because there isn't time for you to really look at the reference and to draw from the reference inspired by my drawing or guided by my drawing. And when you in the end just look at my drawing and copy that, then again, you're doing none of the translation work, because the hard part about the drawing is not so much putting these marks on the paper in this way. It's knowing what marks to use when I'm looking at this to put on the paper and where to put them. And I don't get any practice at that if I'm just copying the artist's marks as they make them. And that's the problem. It doesn't equip me. I learned to copy, which is a skill, but it's not a skill I particularly need if I want to see scenes like this, such as this, and create my own original artworks from them. Does that make sense? So, as I said, I'm not exactly sure if that's what you meant by the question, that one little bot. But yeah, if you're still listening and you want to clarify your question, then you can. Hey there, Ilaria. What time? Yep. I mentioned human figures isn't your strength. You could show it. I've got, I think, 3 videos on drawing figures in a way that's helpful. I think for in a way that's helpful for the sorts of scenes I do. And I just noticed that I don't know why it's on the floor, but I think this is actually a graphic from one of those videos. So as you can see, I'm no great expert in drawing figures, but the sorts of figures I need for my streetscapes, I am more experienced in drawing, because I've practiced those, and I've thought about those, and how we, relate figures to the perspective of the scene, and how we relate figures to their positioning in the scene, and how we simplify figures that are further away, and so forth, and the importance of scale, and of always drawing figures that look as though they're going to match up with the buildings on each side, and they're not super tall people or super small people. All of those issues are sort of covered in this. If you want to become an expert at drawing figures, then my videos really aren't the ones for that, simply because there are people where that's what they do, and they do it amazingly. But if you draw streetscapes and you're wanting figures for that sort of context, then if you have a scroll through, look, I do have a lot of videos. Maybe I should make a playlist of try and find those. But if you just type in the search bar figures or people for my channel, then it should come up with titles that have got, or if you see a thumbnail that's got people in it, then that's what the video is about. I said it because when I told my family I like drawing, they said, "You're too old for this. Focus on your studies rather than wasting your time." Okay. So it's something. Okay, I see what you mean. Okay, that drawing is for children rather than for adults. Look, you've got to work out, and you're 16, you live at home, so you've got to work it out in the context of your life at the moment, and it may be that it can't be as big a focus as. Sorry, a big female bowerbird just landed right outside my window. It may not be able to be your focus right now, and look, there is a time for this and a time for that, and so find the balance for drawing for your life now. And for me, for 30 years, the balance was thinking about it every day. Actually, I could have done more. I had insecurity of reasons, I think, why I wasn't doing it. But for you, yeah. And don't listen to talk about scribbles and whatnot. Accept the fact that they don't have this in them, and so it's hard for them to value it the way you do, and that's okay. They probably value things that you don't think are important. So that's all right. We're all different, and there will come a time in your life where if you want to put more time into your art, you'll probably get more choice about that. But don't lose touch with it now, and do a little bit, and keep working hard at your studies. Can I say that the more skill you develop at learning anything is going to be helpful in learning the skill of drawing. So work hard at school, and it will benefit your drawing, is what I'm saying. Maybe I'm just showing my colors as an ex-school teacher. All the best, Yoko. I hope you can really make it work for you, even now. But don't feel that you have to discover everything that's in you about drawing now. You can wait. You can just let things sort of start to come together, and anticipate what's going to happen when it's time for you to do more. How do you know if an art teacher isn't a great teacher? What would you go by to not take their class? Look, a good artist isn't necessarily a good teacher. That's the first thing. So you can love someone's work, but they're not necessarily a teacher, because teaching is a skill. And so some people have learnt that skill either formally with a course, or just by nature they're suited to teaching skills. By personality and experience, they've become good at teaching. They're able to teach well. And it's not even so much, are they a good teacher or not? The question is, are they a good teacher for me at this point? Now, if I'm doing a formal course that I pay money for, often I don't really know until it's too late to know. If it's YouTube and I'm finding videos to watch and want to know what teachers to engage with, what creators to engage with, then in the end it's going to be which videos improve my drawing, because that's why I'm watching them. If I'm watching them for entertainment, then by all means watch the videos where the drawings are exciting and impress me and I go, gosh, at the end, how did they do that? But if I'm wanting to learn to draw myself, then the videos that move me along to that place, to an improved place, well, they're good videos. They're obviously connecting with me in some way. And a good teacher doesn't make you draw like them. A good teacher equips you to draw the way you want to draw, drawing from the place that's already within you in the best way possible. And so that's why I often talk about principles. And the problem is people just so often want to just copy and get the result rather than learn, which can be frustrating for a teacher. And if you want to copy my drawings, well, as long as you don't sell them, that's okay. But but I get frustrated because I know you want to learn to draw them yourself, and copying my drawings is not the way to learn to do my drawings. The way to learn to do my drawings, but to do them as your drawings, is to understand how I think. So that, because our drawings come from how we think. If we don't copy our original drawings that no one has ever done before, come from our thought processes. And yeah, so does the teacher let you in on their thought processes? Do you come to really understand the process, what's happening? Because how we see it will determine what we do. And that's why we end up so often drawing in ways that relate more to our childhood cartoon-like drawings, because we haven't actually come to understand, if you like, more sophisticated ways of understanding what we're trying to do when we draw, and therefore we revert back to our experience. The problem is that most of the time, for most of it, it doesn't produce the outcomes, the drawings that we want. And so we're disappointed and frustrated, if that makes sense. Let's have a look. Okay, never too old. Yep, that's right. Haha, it seems so. Yoko, keep working on your art regardless. School's very important, but for us creatives, art is just as important to our heart. Yep. Thanks, Deb. Me too. Late 40s, early 50s. That's right. Never too late. Matt, when I'm rendering in pen, I start rushing through my hatching partway through and get sloppy. It's a hard habit to break. Yeah, okay. Well, the good thing is that you can see what you're doing and you can see that it's sloppy. So the first thing I would do is just make sure really focus on what's not working with my sloppy. Why am I saying it's sloppy? Because that will really focus you firstly for where you or how you'll change, But I think, look, I mentioned earlier with hatching's a good skill to work on, because we can just work on the hatching skill. Take a photo of your drawing when it's a line drawing before you do any hatching, and print off half a dozen copies and play around with the hatching. Get really bold in the hatching. Do some adventurous things that you don't do when you're afraid of spoiling your line work, of wrecking your artwork, and be able to do the hatching without the time of producing the line work. So, and you can just sit down and do a couple of different hatches for the same drawing in a row and compare the effect. But I mean, it could be that your drawing sessions are simply too long and maybe you do need to have a break. Or maybe you need to draw, and this I think actually is the better solution. Maybe you need to draw less challenging things so that you can complete the whole drawing in one session. I think that for most people, particularly anyone who thinks they're still in the learning stage, the aim should be to always complete the drawing in the one session. And my reasoning is that a drawing session, in my experience, has a certain rhythm, a certain tempo. And that's to the benefit of the overall drawing. And part of it is that as we start, we do warm up, and all the things we need to be able to do when we draw, we get better at within the session. Our marks become more confident and so forth. And there's a rhythm, a tempo, and there are, and we want to kind of ride that wave. If we stop and come back 3 days later, well, we've lost all that thinking, all that warming up, all that hand-eye coordination. We've lost all these things, and we're cold, and so we're not starting in the same place. So it's almost like two different people are doing this one drawing. And so I want to take advantage of that. I want to take advantage of the fact that there's a certain tempo, a rhythm. It's like a wave that we catch up. We see the wave coming, we catch it, and we body surf in to shore. That's maybe an Australian analogy, but we want to catch the wave all the way and use that momentum to the very end point. And I think that's helpful. So if 20 minutes is as much time as I can work at a drawing, then I should aim to do drawings that I can complete in 20 minutes, if that makes sense. Sometimes we are interrupted and it can't be helped, but I find that whenever I come back to a drawing that I had to leave halfway through, it's like, oh gosh, like I don't even know where to start, because I've disconnected from all the thinking that was guiding where the next mark would go. And I've lost all that, and I have to start again. And so there is this disconnect, and often it's almost like there are two different drawings there. So I would say the other thing is maybe to try and draw less, so that you can get all the hatching done with energy and concentration in the one session. Hope that's helpful. Yoko, seems like a fun way to study. I enjoy studying very much. Thanks, Yoko. Mehmet, you're 43 and 6 months ago discovered this channel, then bought every required pen, pencil, paper, etc., and watched every video here. Now the only thing left is to have courage to start. How can I? Oh dear. Oh dear. How long do you think it will be to feel that the drawings are satisfying? How many tries should Mehmet, I think it seems like you're very focused on having a drawing at the end, having an artwork at the end that looks good. And so you're thinking, when will I know? How quickly can I know whether this is worth doing? How quickly can I know whether I have a nice drawing that I can, show people, that I can feel pleased about myself? And I've come to really believe that being focused on having an artwork at the end is a very, very, very unhelpful way to learn to draw. And it will encourage us into all sorts of unhelpful drawing techniques. I will do things so that I end up with a nice looking drawing at the end, rather than do things that will help me learn to draw, but which will obviously take longer. So if you want a nice drawing, the quickest way to get that is to copy someone else's drawing. Because in the end, the hard thing is not putting the marks on the paper. It's knowing what marks I want to put on the paper, where to put them, what effect I'm trying to create. I've said this about 4 times in this video, but it has gone on for a long time. That's the hard part. It's knowing what marks to put. It's not hard to copy someone else's marks. Well, it's a lot easier to copy someone, but it doesn't teach me how to do them myself. And I've had many, many students tell me, I copied these drawings and they were amazing, but when I went to do my own, I didn't know where to start even. I couldn't understand why I could do such a nice drawing, but then not even be able to start one myself. And the question and the answer is simple, that when I copied someone else's drawing, I wasn't learning any of the skills that you need to really do your own. And because I haven't learnt them, I couldn't use them. And it's such a fundamental point. But if my aim is to have a nice drawing, then it's going to be really tempting to take that shortcut of just copying someone else's work. If I want to learn to draw, then I have to understand it's a process. And like learning to draw the piano, I don't expect to sit down at the start and be able to play an impressive piece. Maybe I can't do that for a couple of years. So I think being realistic about, what I'm trying to achieve, what I'm trying to do, the place I want to get to, is really important. I may be afraid of failing because I realize I'm afraid to fail in playing video games too. Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So therefore, no one likes failing. But when you started to learn to walk, you fell over and, you toddled and you fell over, and then you got up and you walked some more, and you fell over and you got up and you walked some more. And at some point you didn't fall over as much because you learned about balance and you were able to use that. And it's exactly the same in our drawing. We start at a certain point, and that starting point is different for all of us for all sorts of reasons. We started at a certain point and we start. And the important thing is when we fall over, we get up again. And when we make mistakes, we realize that making mistakes is part of the learning process. When you were at school, I bet you didn't always get 100% in everything the teacher marked, whether it was the right or wrong maths questions or whether it was an essay. I bet that you didn't every time get 100% because you were learning and you didn't expect to. It was lovely when you did. It was lovely when we did well and we got a high mark in it when it came back and there were more ticks than crosses. But we didn't expect that we would know everything. Well, why is it when we start to learn to draw, we feel that we have to be able to draw it perfectly? What I'm drawing now, this is after thousands of hours of drawing over a couple of years in hundreds and hundreds, maybe 500 drawings. In most of my life, I didn't have time to do that. Most of my life, I didn't do anything, in fact, to do with art. But it wasn't the right season, it wasn't the right time, and that's okay. But we need to understand and be kind to ourselves that it's a process and we learn in different ways. But the more we understand how we learn, the more we can, then the more effective the time we spend drawing can be. And I had that advantage. You see, I say we don't all start with the same advantage. And that's true. I'm a trained teacher, not an art teacher, but an English history teacher, but I've trained in how we learn. Now, I've been able to use that in learning to draw myself. As I said, that gives me an advantage over people who know nothing about the learning process. And it's just good fortune that I have that, because I didn't get that for art. I didn't get that so that I could draw. It's a skill that I've picked up in my life journey that I'm able to use. And we all have different things, different experiences, different inputs, different trainings for other things that end up being helpful or not. And therefore we start further behind. But we mustn't let that fool us into thinking that it just means I'm not talented. It's not about talent. It's about learning a skill. And when I focus on an artwork, when I start to learn to draw, then I'm wanting to start at the end, not at the beginning. Well, that's not going to work. So So I'd say, Mehmet, having an understanding of this. I mean, I have. If you look at my YouTube playlist on tips and something for the self-taught artist, all of the sorts of videos where I talk about these sort of conceptual issues are on that playlist. And so just have a rummage down through there, and some of the ones that focus on drawing techniques, drawing thinking, not techniques, sorry, the way we think and how that affects what we draw. I think they'll be helpful. Well, thank you. I'm glad that the videos have been helpful. And as one who had to overcome perfectionism and a fear of making mistakes, I've got, I don't know, 3 or 4 videos on perfectionism, and how I overcame it. And that's a big reason why I did begin to draw directly in ink, so that I could stop using erasers, because I was erasing more than I was leaving, and and the more I did that, the more fussy I became about how exact a line had to be. And it was just so counterproductive to everything enjoyable and effective about drawing. And making myself draw directly in ink meant I had to learn to both, not worry so much about things that weren't quite right, and learn how to overcome them within the drawing session. And I've learned that almost all the time I can. And I started this video, or at the start, with this drawing, which is one of my most recent drawings, for a video a couple of days ago. And about 3 times I thought I'd wrecked it and wanted to stop. And if I'd been drawing and not recording, I probably would have stopped. But I pushed on. And honestly, I can't tell that those mistakes are there and that I was unhappy with it. And probably you can't either. Except in the video, I did tell you when I make the mistakes, so that you can see how I overcame them and it wasn't such a problem. But we have to learn that, and we only learn it by pushing through. And I've learned that enough now that I have confidence that most mistakes I can overcome. And so I don't get so uptight about them anymore. And I've also developed, I guess, a drawing style that can cover the sorts of, that both makes those mistakes less common, but does let me cover up the mistakes when they do happen in the overall drawing. Yeah, thanks, Katie. Thanks, appreciate your thoughts for Mehmet. Yeah, I think I may feel myself better. Even the drawing looks surreal. I remembered one of your videos on the forest with crickets reminding those points. I will try for sure. All the best. Wish you all the best, Mehmet. JJQ, I try every different style I can, learn techniques, and just you learn from experimenting on different styles and different materials. Don't be scared to try different materials. Absolutely. Yep. And don't forget the paper. The paper we use is really important. And there's a very big difference between using ink on a very smooth surface and a surface with even a little bit of surface texture. And with thin paper or thick paper, it makes a huge difference. So, the best drawing materials, though, are the ones that you can waste. They're the ones that you can easily get and you can easily afford, so that you're never concerned about wasting the material. Because if you're concerned about wasting, that will constrain what you do. You'll become less. You'll feel less free to experiment or be bold or try something different if you're afraid of wasting the pen or wasting the paper, wasting the paint, whatever. So they're the best ones. But within that proviso, then experiment. Although I have certainly found the benefit of, once I've experimented, to use the same materials over again, simply because different materials, different pens handle in different ways. And when we're learning to draw, we want to eliminate a lot of those types of variables. And so I think at the very beginning, it can also be helpful to use the same brand and to stay with the pen, because each pen balances differently in our hand, and the way the ink flows is different, and the way the ink flows on a particular brand of paper is different. And if we start to learn in deep ways all of those things on just a few things, then I can control them more easily. And that comes to, I think, a more focused outcome in my drawing. Mehmet's just saying that his wife will be happy to see him start drawing because she sees me on the screen and wonders why he doesn't start drawing. Yeah, and Deb suggesting trying 100-day challenge where you draw every day for 100 days. Look, at the moment, Mehmet, I do have a series on 10-minute real-time drawing videos where the actual video has 10 minutes of real-time drawing, so it's not sped up, and the rest of the drawing might be double time, but that might just be 2 minutes. They're all drawings that I've finished in less than 20 minutes, often, mostly, in fact, less than 15 minutes. So they are meant to be, in some ways, simpler. And so that might be a good series for you to watch and to use. There are 80 of those at the moment. So you've got 2.5 months worth of a drawing for every day. And I may have done some more since then, by then. All right, look, it's 2 hours, so I'm thinking this is probably a good time to wrap this up, and I'll go and have another coffee and try and wake up. I had a late night last night, so still a bit groggy at the moment. But look, I hope these ramblings have been helpful. If you haven't hit the like button, please do. It'd be nice to get over 40. If there's 2 people watching, of the 19 there who haven't hit like yet, that would be nice. But yeah, appreciate your time, and happy drawing. Thanks, Deb. And look, if you have friends who draw, then please help me out and let them know of the channel and of the videos. That is a way you can help me if I've helped you. But at any point, I'll say goodbye now. And I think we've had some people arrive at the house, so I'll go and see what's happening. And yeah. But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however you conceptualize before you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.